Happy Thursday to everyone. Welcome to the Thursday edition of the HockeyDebates.com podcast. I'm Bob Duff, as always joined by esteemed Hall of Fame hockey writer Kevin Allen. And today we're glad to welcome aboard Daren Millard, formerly of Sportsnet, and now working on the broadcast with the Vegas Golden Knights in Las Vegas. And Daren, obviously a lot of buzz about Las Vegas. It just seems like, crazy to talk about playing for the Stanley Cup in the summer, but playing for the Stanley Cup in the summer allegedly in Las Vegas, it sounds like.
Well, what the big plus is, they've already done it a couple of years ago, played for the Stanley Cup in the summer in Vegas in that miracle, year number one, which was so phenomenal and captured everybody's attention. So I think as crazy as it is, I think that go around against the Washington Capitals went a long way towards just getting all the normal things that you'd raise as red flags for playing hockey in the desert in the middle of summer out of the way, and they can focus on just getting down to planning this Hub City tournament.
Could you imagine, Daren, when Vegas was announced as going to be an NHL city, that it would become such an important venue almost immediately? Like, I looked at the revenue basis of all the teams recently, and there they were at the top of it in terms of, ticket resources. And, as soon as we heard there was going to be a hub city, the first thing that came out was, well, it's got to be in Vegas, because we want, in the NHL, we want to be associated with that Vegas brand. Did you see this coming? Did you anticipate, that we would be, that Vegas would become so important so quickly?
No, I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I happened to be in the building the night of the expansion draft, Kevin, and that was my first experience in Las Vegas. Was that weekend at the NHL Awards, and I knew about the gaming and the strip and everything that goes along with the shows in the Valley. But what struck me about that night was that the awards were full of energy because the rink was full for people to learn the players' names of their team. So that really grabbed on that it was going to be a success. And then I was here year number 2 for a weekend and did a couple of games. And I've never seen a place where the logo of the sports team is so noticeable. It's like this team has been around for 20 years. Between bumper stickers or T-shirts or car flags, whatever you want to say. So they've absolutely grabbed on. And then when you couple that with success, Kev, and then the management that has been around for certainly a long time in George McPhee, and the success that Kelly McCrimmon has had, you create a real strong group to be influential in and around the market. And I think all that has come together. And it wasn't just a flash in the pan, but there's been continued success and growth, and it's turned into be a very influential market in the National Hockey League. Not just a good early success story as a franchise.
We'll talk a little bit more about that, Daren. You're like me. You grew up in Canada in the traditional hockey markets, as I like to call them. Let's face it, there were a lot of people who scoffed at the notion of Las Vegas getting an NHL team, but what we see of it on TV and in the rink, you can certainly see the palpable buzz that this has created. And you talk about being around the city. What's it like? Are the Golden Knights kind of the talk of the town?
Oh yeah, they're it. I know the Raiders are coming in. The National Football League stadium's being completed right now, and that's going to crowd the landscape, the sporting landscape a little bit. But there's no doubt. I'll break it down with you as simply as I can. Is we walk the dogs at night, and every second person that you pass has a VGK sweater on or some kind of paraphernalia, hat or shirt or whatever. Like everybody wants to talk hockey, whether you're at the golf course or around town. If they recognize you being from the team, they want to talk about the success of the team, or what do we got to do to get it going as midway through the point of this season, or talk about the coaching change. People are absolutely engaged. Picking up your kids from school, it it's as close to being a Canadian market and that type of conversation as you can get. I mean, it's still the southern states, and there's still areas where you have ability to grow, but on a day-to-day basis, you don't struggle to have hockey talk here. It finds you. You don't have to go looking for it.
Dan, I actually want to talk about the team a little bit. It won't be long before we'll be talking about the competition. Let's get it.
Isn't it great? I love
it is. And I want to ask you, what's the difference between the Knights under Gerard Gallant and under DeBoer in terms of what he's done there?
Consistency, traction. I mean, there's not a person that I know of around that didn't expect or predict the Golden Knights to win the Pacific Division regular season crown this year. It was as close to unanimous as you were going to get. And they just were never – they won the first 2 games of the year and then dropped back. And they kind of rode that little roller coaster throughout the year. And there was never that traction where you thought, this team's going to flip the switch. You always thought they were going to, but they were never able to. And Kevin, there was a homestand at the start of January where they played 7 straight at home and then went on the road for 8. And they won the first 4 games of that homestand. And a couple of them in crazy come from behind fashion. And you thought, okay, here it comes. It's going. It's ready. And Turk and the coaching staff have it going in the right direction. And they lost the last 3 and blew a couple of leads. And that was the tipping point. They went on the 8-game road trip and lost the first game in Buffalo. You know what's happening in Buffalo. We all know that you don't expect to lose to Buffalo, especially after what's just occurred. And you kind of got the feeling, do you continue to wait? Now you're mid-January, or do you take the chance and make a switch? I think a lot of people thought they would be waiting. Kelly McCrimmon made the decision, and they hit the ground running after the break. They finished up the 3 games on that road trip and then took their All-Star break and their midseason break. Sorry for rambling, but then came out and that seemed to be what caught the players' attention or woke them up. This was not a group that was expected the move, and it caught them off guard, and it took them a while to figure it out. Maybe over that break, but when they did, they were fully engaged in what Pete DeBoer was doing, and if nothing else, it was just a shock to the system. And then Pete's a really good coach too, and made a couple of tweaks and changes to the systems.
One of the moves that Vegas made at the deadline that kind of caught people off guard was when they picked up Robin Lehner. And Kevin and I were talking about this last week that you're talking. I mean, the Vegas won't face that because they're not in the best of 5s, but when you get into now a short playoff series, you're going to have – what are the goalies? The goalies haven't seen pucks in a long time. You wonder, are the goalies going to be a step behind the shooters to start with? And what do you do if you're one of those coaches in a best of 5 series and you have a specific number 1 guy and he doesn't look right in the first game? I mean, you can't wait long to make a decision to change, because if you lose 2 in a row, then you're right up against the wall.
I was just part of a symposium talking about goaltending, and I do some work with the guys at In Goal magazine, and we had the conversation this week, in fact, Bob, about this. There's never been a time where there's more debate about which goaltender you start in a playoff series, and number 2, the rope has never been shorter. I mean, you go through the teams. Vegas won't play it, but will we see Robin Lehner and Marc-Andre Fleury if they go deep? I would think so. Both of them, you've got that luxury. But when you examine teams like the Pittsburgh Penguins, how short is the rope there? They've used both guys this year. The Minnesota Wild have used both goaltenders this year. The Edmonton Oilers gone back and forth. I think it can be looked at as a short rope, but I think it's also a really big luxury for these head coaches to have 2 guys that they can play with confidence right now, or be able to switch to in these playoffs. And you'll probably see, of the 24 teams, will we see 20 of them use 2 goaltenders in these playoffs? I think that's a pretty good number right now, based on what I've seen during the regular season.
Darren, I don't think the National Hockey League national fan base has kind of caught on how well Shea Theodore has played. This season I think he had 12 or 13 even strength goals, and I know a lot of the writers mentioned him that he should be at least on the Norris ballot, if not in the first couple, but should be mentioned as well. Can you just talk about where his game has risen to?
Dominant, absolutely dominant, as good as you will see in the National Hockey League. I'll give you a backstory. I mentioned that I was here for a couple of games last winter, and it was games against Florida and Dallas. And watching him in person in those two games was a complete eye opener. We were used to seeing him on television, but that it blew me away, Kev. And at the start of this year, he had the treatment for cancer. Was injured in training camp and got off to an admittedly really slow start, and struggled a little bit in October and November. Maybe that's why the traction wasn't there. Quite frankly, also dealt without Nate Schmidt for a while. So it was a slower start for Shea Theodore, but from January on, he has been on form. And the last month and a half of the season before the pause, I would say he was the best defenseman in the game. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in Vegas with the Golden Knights. He was by far the best player on the ice for the Golden Knights, and just dominated in a really efficient way. Controlled the game. He's not flashy, but he can do everything really, really well. It's almost like he's Mark Stone, but as a defenseman in that regard. Just so capable in every facet, every skill set as a defenseman. And I'm glad you brought him up because I think if he continues the way he's playing right now into a full National Hockey League season, he's a Norris Trophy finalist.
And another theory that's been bandied about, and we won't know for sure till we see these guys on the ice because we've obviously never dealt with a scenario like this, but a lot of people seem to think offense will be a step ahead of defense when things start up again, and we could see some 1980s style hockey now. Vegas has got a number of guys who can put the puck in the net, so they look like a team to be well suited. If they had to win a 7-6 game, they could do it.
Yeah, well balanced, four lines too. That's the other thing that the Golden Knights have in their favor. A fourth line that's more known for banging. But Ryan Reeves was approaching double digits. Will Carrier was having a career year. Tomas Nosek. So they've got some abilities there. They start that line most games since Pete DeBoer's come on board. But the other three lines are deep and can roll and a really good power play. They're set up. They're more known for their depth and all around game. But don't sleep on their offensive totals. Pacioretty had the outside shot at the first 40-goal season of his career too. So I like the idea of where you're going with that they can put the puck in the net. There's no doubt about that. And then you add in somebody like Will Carlson, who was coming into his own after battling some injuries this year. He was playing on the top line, centering Pacioretty and Stone, and that line had really taken off as well. So it'd be interesting to see whether they bring them back. One thing I will say about training camps and going into this play-in phase and the round robin, I think with the 3-week camp, Bob Kev, I think you're going to see so many teams spending a majority of their time scrimmaging during these time slots to give their goaltenders an opportunity, but also to get their players into real flow when it comes to structure of playing a game and trying to hit the ground running more than maybe they normally would.
When the Golden Knights acquired Alec Martinez, it looked like a missing piece type acquisition to me. Down the stretch, they were a good team, 8-2, I think, in their last 10. Did that happen? Did Martinez? Did he look like he's the guy exactly that they needed to sort of round everything together?
Yeah, absolutely, top 4 guy. And I got here just before training camp, middle of training camp last year. And it feels like that conversation had been occurring since that time. The entire season was sort of structured around acquiring a top 4 defenseman and who that might be. And because actually LA had made the trade with Jake Muzzin a year ago to Toronto and made the deal with term left on that contract, everybody was zeroing on Alec Martinez. Just a really solid, capable defenseman with oodles of experience. I mean, he's E.F. Hutton. When he talks, people listen, and he was situated. He was actually in the dressing room beside Zach Whitecloud, not by choice, but it just happened. And just seeing players flock to him and gleam onto him, and really gravitate towards what he had to say, and the fact that he's still capable of playing and still plays at a really high level. Two major pluses. And he also plays with Shea Theodore. They put him up in the last few games before the pause, and that gives you a top four with Braden McNabb, Nate Schmidt, Shea Theodore, Alec Martinez. That is really, really solid.
The league has said that they won't allow any team to play in their home rink, even though there's not going to be fans. I saw an interview with Sean Couturier yesterday. He said that he thinks once you get into the battle of a playoff series, the players won't even notice that there's not a crowd. Do you think it makes any difference? Is there any such thing as home ice advantage when there's no fans in the seats?
No, and the idea that a team won't play in its own city if it's chosen as a hub, I don't know whether that's actually been made official or not. There's so much out there about this, but in the last week, it certainly has grown in significance, but I don't think that it's a big deal. We've seen in past tournaments, whether it's the Olympics in Vancouver or the World Cup in Toronto, where Team Canada got the home team dressing room throughout the tournament, and everybody else kind of had to rotate around. That's not going to happen if Vancouver's a hub city. The Canucks aren't necessarily getting their dressing room for the whole thing. So I think that kind of thing is going to be taken out of the mix. But I don't see playing in your own rink without fans, without the effects, all that kind of stuff as a major advantage. I think it's minimal at best.
All right, well, Daren, we appreciate you joining us today and offering some insights on a team that certainly is right up there in the Stanley Cup contention list when you start analyzing it. And hopefully we'll have you on again to talk about Vegas as they make a playoff run this year.
Anytime. Hopefully they go deep so we can do this again. It's been fun being on with you two guys. I'm big fans.
Thanks, Daren.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.
All right, there we go. That was Daren Millard. I don't know if you know this, Kevin. Daren's quite a goaltender himself. He played some junior hockey. I've seen him play goal for the Toronto Maple Leafs alumni team in the past. So he knows his stuff when he talks about goaltending.
I believe it. Have you played against him as a goal?
I have not played against him, but I have seen him play.
No, okay. Bob, I wanted to talk about the rest of the show. One of the issues I wanted to bring up is we obviously talked about the Buffalo situation, but what's come to light since the last podcast is that why Jason Botterill was fired was even though he had received a vote of confidence, is that he had been notified that they wanted him to trim the payroll a little bit or to try to win with less money. And I think their argument would be, we've given you a carte blanche and you haven't spent our money very efficiently. And probably it didn't help that he's sitting out there with 7 years left on a contract with Jeff Skinner, paying him $9 million a year, and he was a 14-goal scorer. But here's my question to you, and I thought about this, and I think I feel pretty strongly about this. I think when you're an owner of a professional sports team, you accept the fact that, this is a civic trust that you have. Now, if you're an owner, you're going to say, look, I got to run it the way I see fit to make it a profitable business. And I think that's true to a certain extent. But I think sports is different. And I think when you become an owner, you accept that. I think you're well aware of that fans expect, more than just worry about the bottom line. And my argument would be, if you don't accept that, then don't buy a team, especially in this day and age when teams are so expensive. So I do think you have an obligation to, if it costs you a little more money, if you got to stretch a little bit to try to win, I think you owe it to the fans to do that. And, it's not written anywhere, and, there's no penalties, obviously, for doing that. But, don't get in the business if you don't want to, push it a little bit. And, I respect guys, trying to make their teams profitable. And I think that sometimes you do have to make, hard decisions. But I just think in general terms, you've got to do a little more when you're an owner of a professional sports team, just because, it's more than a business when you buy a pro sports team.
Well, I think we've seen evidence of that in Ottawa with Eugene Melnyk. He certainly has a fractured relationship with the fan base there. They resent the fact that so many of their, this is a team that, a few years ago was a goal away from going to the Stanley Cup final. And then that team was completely dismantled. Erik Karlsson, Mark Stone, Matt Duchene, you start going down the list of all the guys that they got rid of over the last couple of years. And on top of that, Melnyk complained about attendance. He even used the old threat about moving the team to another city or selling it if they didn't step up to the plate. And I just thought, you take away, you tantalize them with that team that almost gets there, and then you've got it. And then you have the nerve to criticize the fans for not showing up. I just think that's a perfect example there of, like, as you say, there is an unwritten social contract, I think, between the owner of a team and the fans who support that team.
Yeah. Well, and I think there is a time when it's totally fine to not spend the money, and we've seen evidence of that in recent years. It's become almost commonplace for teams to embrace a rebuild, and everybody's on board. The fan base says, hey, we get it. Strip it down to the chassis. We saw it in Toronto. The Rangers announced what they were doing, in Detroit. They're doing it, and there's actually benefit to that, as we know, because then you build up some cap space, and then you're in a position. So, but you can do that only if you have a good connection or a good relationship, with your fan base, that they understand what you're doing, that you explain it, that you're transparent, that, they know when you do have a team that you will spend. And, certainly in Detroit, the Ilitch family has a long history of spending money on their team. When there wasn't a salary cap, they were always among the top payroll teams. So the assumption is that, when Steve Yzerman tells the Ilitch family, hey, green light, we're ready to contend, then they'll be spending money. And, I think there are other situations as well. When the Rangers announced 2 years ago that they were going into a rebuild, I think fans, said, okay, well, we get that. So, maybe you're not going to spend the money you are. But when they had the opportunity to get Panarin, they did do that. And I think the fan base knew they would do that in those situations because they're the Rangers. That's what they do. And I think in Buffalo's case, the fan base doesn't know what to make of this, because the ownership that's been in place since 2011 hasn't made any moves that's gotten the team in the playoffs. So, when they hear that the instructions to Botterill was do a little more with less, I think they look at that and go, no, we can't accept that. We expect you to spend and try to make this team better. And, I think you can make an argument that, the Pegulas had spent money with no results, and it's like throwing good money after bad. But, I don't really think Buffalo's that far off. We talked about this the other day with Eichel, with Dahlin, with Olofsson, Reinhardt, Ristolainen can play. So there are several, players on this team that make you believe they're close to being able to contend.
Yeah, I mean, one of their big issues continues to be goaltending. I don't know when you have to almost go back to Ryan Miller really to see the last time Buffalo had what you'd consider to be an elite goalie in that. It's kind of tried guys from the system. They tried, as Mike said on Tuesday's podcast, Carter Hutton's not a number one goalie, and they tried to roll the dice on him as a number one goalie, and it hasn't worked out. I think that's one area. You've got to make sure you've got a guy in between the pipes that's going to get the job done night after night. If you're never going to be able to patch up that area by scoring more goals or playing better defense. You still got to have a guy in the net who makes the saves when he's supposed to make the saves, and Buffalo hasn't had that guy for a long time.
Right. Another issue, and I want you to talk about it. You were telling me about the story about what Sean Couturier had to say in Philadelphia about picking up and playing hockey during the pandemic in July. Fill in our listeners about that.
Sean Couturier of the Flyers was on TSN, I believe it was yesterday, and he said that one of the things that concerns him in this whole return to play is he said the players really don't feel certain as to what steps will be taken when and if players test positive. And he said, especially if you get in a situation like he used them as an example, the Flyers, supposing they were in a game 6 or 7 of a series and they were facing elimination, and all of a sudden Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek both test positive, and they're told, yeah, you guys can't play. He said, and then he said, let's say the team they're playing, 2 or 3 guys test positive on that team, and they're told they can't play, and they're also, the key guys in the core of that team. All of a sudden, your lineup's looking like a preseason game where your 5 or 6 best players aren't playing, and it's game 7 of a playoff series. He questioned whether fans would be okay with that and would even want to watch it.
Yeah, I think that sort of thinking is a little misguided. Like I think the point that he does make that I think it is important is that it would be better for all the fans, the players, and everyone else if we had a more definitive plan for how this will work if there's multiple people testing positive. That if it was laid out, if this happens, this will happen, and so forth. Because my issue is, even though I understand their thinking that they're going to have to see on a case-by-case basis, what's happening with each individual team, and to make a decision on what to do next. However, when you do that, it looks bad, if they look at the first time and there's a playoff series and there's 3 from each team, and they say, okay, play on, everyone that didn't test positive keeps going, and then if a week later we have like 5 from each team and everybody says, well, we got to stop, and one team's up 3-1 in the series, well, what's going to happen. And, there's people are going to be upset, and people are going to say, well, why, if there was 3 players from each team, was it okay? But when there was 5, when we have these expanded rosters, in other words, I think the NHL would be better off if they had an independent medical, team sort of make, kind of judgment calls on what happens in those situations. But, with regard to the fan base, I think the fans sort of understand that we're in the midst of a pandemic, and, that these things are just totally out of their control. And you can be sad that your team has lost its star players, but it's nobody's fault. And I think people will still tune in and watch the games if, even if Connor McDavid is told, oh, you tested positive, you're out of the lineup. This isn't a sprained ankle or, a bad bruise on your shoulder that you can try to play through. This is serious stuff. And I think everybody kind of understands that. That's why I think, what John said, I think there is some legitimate concern about that, just in terms of the players needing to sort of know how it's going to work. But I don't think we should concern ourselves about whether or not the hockey will be attractive if 3 stars from 2 of the teams, are down with positive virus tests.
Yeah, I think the real issue would be if they get into a scenario where, say, 4 or 5 guys test positive on a team, and then the next day another 4 or 5, and all of a sudden you got 10 of their players are out of the lineup. Then, what do? Do you just keep playing without those 10 guys? And you'd have to think that, if they've been playing the other team for a while, the odds are someone on that other team is going to get infected as well. They may not. We've seen that not happen in cases, but also we've seen it happen. So,
well, that's why they're going to test every day, just to to try to pinpoint and locate those things. And our understanding is they're going to try to social distance the best they can, but you can't social distance within a hockey team, not with any hope of it being true.
Yeah, and I think one of the big issues they'll have in terms of the social distancing will be when they get into these best of 7 rounds. What if one team sweeps and they're sitting around for a week waiting for a best of 7 series to finish? That's when I think the guys are going to get antsy and they'll start getting together and doing stuff. Now, they may not leave the hotel, but I could certainly see them all gathering in a room to watch something or watch a game or something, and they'll do. But I just don't. That's when I think, like we said the other day, when they're in the midst of a battle of a series, they're laser focused on that series. It's going to be when they're in between series. If there's a team that's got a bunch of downtime between series, that's when I think it'll be harder for these guys to just lock themselves in their room and behave like good boys.
That's when they're going to remember they're in Vegas.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're between games and sitting around, and it's 8 days to the next. And somebody will say, "Well, we can quarantine 10 days," and and off they'll go.
All right. Well, as always, we're out of time before we're out of words. We're glad you were able to join us again today. I'm Bob Duff. He's Kevin Allen. We're the HockeyDebates.com podcast. Join us again on Tuesday with another special guest, and we'll talk more about the world of hockey.